All right, we are live. Hey folks, so we got Stein and Alejo here. We'll just give it a few more minutes just for people to pop in and join before we really kick off. So before we start, I'm Mikkel, one of the founders of Sync, and I'll be moderating this webinar. And a bit of housekeeping, you can see on the side we have a chat button. So if you want to ask any questions, anything you want Alejo or Stein to give the input on, just any time you want, feel free to pop it in there, and we can get to it. All right, it looks like we got a few more people popping in. Very good. Let's kick off. So welcome to this webinar called How Aiven and Shalion use dbt and observability to deliver reliable data products. Today we have Stein from Aiven and Alejo from Shalion joining us. Do you want to give a quick intro, guys, just of the two of you?
Yeah, of course. Maybe I can start. So I'm Stein. I'm a manager of data engineering at Aiven. In practice, that means I manage the data platform team at Aiven. I've been doing that for around 4 years now, when we grew from like pretty small startup to more of a scale up now with around 400 people. We mainly do analytics. Like, should I already go into what we do as a team, Mikkel, actually?
Yeah, I can click on the slides in just a minute. So Alejo, if you want to give a brief intro as well,
Sure, let's do that.
So hello, good morning. I am Alejo. I am SVP Data and Analytics at Shalion. It's a Barcelona-based startup. I joined Shalion back in February, so it's been just a few months. Previously, I've been leading and scaling data and analytics teams in other startups, also here in Barcelona.
Cool, good stuff. And yeah, I've had the joy of knowing you both for a few years, and I think definitely we can get into some pretty meaty topics. So before we kick off the more informal discussion, we just have a few slides prepared here just to give a bit of a context of what your company does and how your data platform looks like. So Stein, I'll just hand it over to you to start with here.
Thank you, Mikkel. So at Aiven, I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but we offer, I would say, data infrastructure as a service. So we allow you to, we manage your data infrastructure for you, and that may be a Postgres database or a Kafka pipeline. And you don't have to worry about it. And we do this across all the major clouds. And yeah, well, it's like and we try to do it as open source as possible, meaning that you can quite easily move away from us or move to us. And we just make sure that it keeps on running. So you don't need to worry about that. I'll give some more examples later, but I think this is enough for now. Yes, and our data platform, we have a pretty, well, as people used to say, the modern data stack. So we have Google BigQuery in the middle. We use dbt, what we're talking about now. We have various data extraction tools such as Supermetrics or Stitch, but also we use our own Kafka to get our API calls in our data warehouse. We have Snowplow for tracking. And then we orchestrate it all through Airflow, also on Google Cloud Platform. And then we have some various places where the data flows through. So we use Superset or the managed preset. We send data back to Salesforce or Slack or Postdoc for product analytics. We have some notebooks as well. And then to look at all of that, what's happening, we have Sync there on the top, which we'll get on today. And I can show you a bit about what we actually do with Sync. I think that's it. Maybe Alejo, you want to
For
show
sure.
what you have?
Thank you, Stein. Very interesting. We are not that big by today. Hopefully, we will get into it in the following months, years. So we are a small Barcelona-based startup. We are currently a little bit over 100 employees. We are a market research company. So basically, we gather lots of data for our clients, which are global brands and some agencies around the world. And basically, we solve for them the huge pain of being able to monitor all the products that they sell in more than 800 retailers around the world. So we offer all these kind of insights. So from content and images and product monitoring, ratings and reviews, pricings, availability, stock, assortment, and then all the media part, which is visibility, paid search, and ads tracking. So I always like to say that this is like the search engine optimization and search engine marketing, but instead of having to deal with few search engines, you have to deal with hundreds of e-commerce, everyone with their own characteristics about the algorithm and the media placements and so on. Okay. Just some figures about our volume. So if you move to next slide, Michael, please. Thank you very much. I always like to talk about these three main dimensions. No, on one side, as I said, we cover more than 800 retailers around the world. These retailers are in more than 60 countries. We go in deep, so we go up to more than 50K SKUs, monitor over 500 categories. And this means with the frequency that we scrap means that we are scraping more than 3 million pages every day. Last but not least, about our data platform. So quite similar to what Stein was saying, was showing. So instead of BigQuery, we have Snowflake. That's what they call the modern data stack. Okay, so we have I would say two main data sources. The big one, which is everything we collect through our cluster of bots, where we scrape all these e-commerces through a set of proxies, and we have a template engine where we extract all these variables. We store all this information into S3 buckets, and then we load it into Snowflake. So for our back office information, we have relational databases in Aurora, and we use Airbyte to mirror these tables into Snowflake. We process and model everything with dbt, and then we consume either with Looker through Looker Embedded. We have a custom front end on top of Looker, and also we expose the data sets through APIs to some of our customers. And then last but not least, mostly important, we govern and observe all this platform with several tools. I would say one of the most, or the most relevant one, is Sync.
Very good. No, thanks for that introduction, both of you. I think digging in, that the very first question we asked both of you is, what is your most important data use case? So it'd be really interesting if you could talk about both how data is used within your company a little bit more, but also what is the consequence when things go wrong, and why is it so important to build this reliability?
Yeah, I can maybe share, and it's really interesting because I think we have very different use cases. So ours is mostly internal. So we do not have any customer-facing data at the moment. So the criticality is naturally a bit lower than when you would have external-facing data. But for us, we mainly use it for decision-making. So a big part of what we do is making sure that we have metrics on how our business performs. And that's then also being used in our decision-making of our exec team. So they have weekly business reviews where they use this. But besides that, a bit more operational, we use it for ad platform optimization, or our gross margin, or our sales forecast, and all those kind of things. And we serve the whole business. So we work with our product team, we work with our marketing teams, our sales teams, all of them. But it's only internal. So yeah.
In our case, as you may have deduced from my previous explanation, our data is the product. So everything we produce is critical because it impacts our customers. So this is very differential, no? We have started, just to mention now, that we have started to detail the different criticality levels all our metrics have, because not everything has the same criticality. And whenever there are issues, we need, as a data team, to be able to properly prioritize depending on the impact of the incident.
That's actually super interesting, that last part. We often get asked about how do you determine these severity levels, and how do you set that criticality? So it'd be interesting just getting your thoughts on how you think about that.
Our first approach, and that's an idea I got from our VP of Customer Success, is to use an RFM framework, Recency, Frequency, Monetary Impact. Basically, it's talking to our customers and seeing which metrics are the most used and have the biggest monetary impact on their business.
That makes sense. And did you go around and talk to different people, or how are you able to assess that?
To be honest, we are starting this process. We know more or less, because of our conversations with them, which dashboards are more critical than others, but we want to go at the metric level.
Yeah, super interesting. We'll dig more into that as well as it comes to data products, because I know that is one thing that you use as a bit of a framework. But maybe just before that, if we zoom out a little bit, so you both have these different data use cases of different importance, and you have a modern data stack, and you had dbt in place already before you brought in Sync. Could you talk a bit about how you'd set up dbt, the level of testing you did, and also how you came to that conclusion that you needed to bring in a data reliability platform?
So in our case, we had what many other companies have, which is dbt tests, all kind of tests, no? So basic tests like uniqueness, not null, and so on, or accepted values. Then we also were using what they call data tests, is for more checking about business rules. And we also started using unit tests since they introduced them in, I think it's 1.6. And apart from that, we are still using what they call dbt Slim CI. So we have a Slim CI process to prevent any errors going into production. And we are also introducing a data diff check, where we not only check for the structure, for the schema and the SQL syntax, but also differences in the data generated because of the changes introduced.
That's very interesting. I assume you have a bit more elaborate testing than we do, or like we do have elaborate testing, but I guess the impact of deploying something that's incorrect is quite different. But let me tell you a bit about what we have. So we also have the basic test, also some more elaborate tests. For example, for some of our metrics like annual recurring revenue, we make sure that when there are changes made to upstream tables, that they actually do not change that metric. So we are really considerate of when it changes, and we have to make like an explicit change there. Like we have to be like, when it's changed, we make sure that that's clear. But we actually had a different observability platform before Sync a couple of years back. Then we actually, like many people often get an observability provider when things are going wrong, but we kind of wanted to prevent that by being early and getting a tool like this to make sure that it doesn't go wrong and we can keep that trust with our customers or internal customers. So we didn't really need it, but then once we started getting it, we actually saw that we caught a lot more things than we thought we would. Also false positives, but there were plenty of cases where we found something useful. And then, well, naturally, we continued with that, but we wanted a tool that combined our dbt test with that observability. So we ended up with Sync.
Yeah, we were trying out several tools before choosing Sync. Also, in my previous company, we were also using an observability tool. And one thing I really liked about Sync is the integration with dbt. So it allows you to extend dbt and not substitute dbt in terms of checks.
It'd be super interesting going in a little bit more to that, because I think that's one thing we've seen, that as you start bringing in more tools in your data stack, you risk having these dispersed workflows where you kind of break up where you define ownership and how you activate alerts. And I think what you've both done quite well is really use dbt as that source of truth. But maybe just before that, you mentioned a thing, Stein, that I think many people, when we speak to them, either get confused about or don't know. So we often talk about what are issues that happened that you didn't catch, but you mentioned something around actually only when you started using the tool did you learn about issues that you didn't even know existed.
Yeah, so we
unknowns, no?
yeah, exactly. And like we often have that we are deploying a change, and then like what you normally wouldn't see is that we somehow like duplicate the amount of rows. And it still happens, even though we have some of those checks there that actually should tell us before we deploy. But yeah, they're just really hard to catch, and you can't really say this table should have this amount of rows because things change. But yeah, we've had several of those cases where probably we wouldn't have caught it for a month or two unless we had a tool like this.
Yeah, I wonder if you could speak specifically, either of you, to any specific issue you caught and kind of how you went about getting notified about it, and how it would otherwise have been difficult to catch.
Yeah, I can share one case. So we do like our like for our internal analytics platform, we have some data sources that we extract, and we changed the way we extract some of those data sources and some of the incremental models we have for those data sources. And we were missing some rows that were hard deleted in the source because we changed something. We didn't know that in our development. We missed those edge cases. But then once we deployed it, we actually saw a drop in some of our tables in Sync. And then we were like, okay, something is off. This shouldn't change, even though we changed our extraction. So then we dug into it and we figured out what was the root cause of that.
Yes, the use case I had in mind, it's very similar. I had noted down that for me, one of the most valuable monitors on top of what we have in dbt is the freshness and volume, no? And I have a similar use case like 1 or 2 weeks ago, where the most common pains that we have is deploying some changes that either generate duplicates, so we validate this with the uniqueness tests, or reduce or grow considerably the number of rows, no? And in our case, we had deployed a change that in the model that we did the change, there was no issue, but like 2 levels below, there was an issue, and it was reducing considerably the number of rows. So thanks to the volume monitor, we detected, there is this considerable reduction. We saw that was the root cause, and we fixed it before anyone complaining about it. So it was a very good example.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, because I think you both have, I probably rate you both as being in the top quintile in terms of test maturity and having set up dbt. So it's not necessarily that you are immature in the way you thought about dbt. It's more that it's a different type of issues. I also know, Alejo, you mentioned you have many hundreds of partners where you scrape data and you kind of rely on this third party. Are there any implications in that kind of external data reliance in terms of the monitoring and reliability?
Yes, for sure. So scraping, it's an art, okay? It's not science, because you may face issues every day. So it's very important to us to be able to detect any of these issues before the end customer complains. We have some complex issues that we are starting to deal with. So we have been very focused on completeness. So are we scrapping what we should be scrapping every day? Okay. But now we are facing into more complex scenarios where, okay, out of an Amazon listing page, we get ads, we get sponsored products, we get what they call product showcase, whatever, okay? And by any reason, one day you start receiving less of something in one retailer. So you need to be able to detect this. And not only for this case, for me, one of the greatest learnings since we started using Sync is this continuous improvement process, okay? It's not a plug and play. It's not I plug Sync and then my quality is top and I don't have any issues. It's for me, it has been a continuous improvement process, especially finding the correct threshold so that for each monitor, so that you don't go into lots of noise, lots of false positive, but you also don't miss anything. And I really liked your articles, Michael, that you were posting since quite some months, even years ago in the Sync blog. They were very useful about how to properly implement all these things.
Yeah, I think one thing we noticed. Time. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to, on top of that, I think one of the articles that you've written in the past is this broken window theory, meaning that if you have a lot of broken tests, then people will not really take care of them. And I think that's kind of similar here, because we need to find the right balance that we still take action to all those alerts, our DBT test or our observability monitors, to make sure that we keep being on top of them. So it's really this delicate balance that Alejo said, that like how much do you really check, and then we just need to make sure that we keep a really healthy balance of how many alerts we act on.
Yes. For instance, one thing that we have introduced some weeks ago is on our dailies, on the data engineering dailies, we open the incidents tab in Sync and we look at the current incidents. We look at their status. If we assign someone to take a look at them, and we keep the updates of the incident. And in our case, it's very important, the communication part. Okay, that's something I have realized from my previous experiences that were more similar to the ones Stein was explaining. Like data is a support team for the rest of the business. No, in my current scenario, communication is key. So whenever there is an incident, I have a Slack channel where I communicate it to my stakeholders. I need to inform what's being impacted, what's the expected timeline to resolve this, and much probably they will ask me lots of questions about the incident.
Yeah, I think we can touch on that later as well. And you've both adopted incident management in different ways, and I think just doing that in a data team is something we've seen most yet to do. I would say on the point of alert overload, the reason why I wrote the articles is also that was probably our top 3 problems we saw, was that people had a lot of tests in place, but not always intentional tests, and they ended up in a place where they just had too many alerts, and then in the very worst case, that meant that people stopped paying attention to them, and they started getting this impression that it was okay to let tests fail, and then started writing less tests. So there's this kind of negative flywheel.
Let's just remove the failing test. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it seems like you both thought pretty hard about that. We are actually writing a guide where we try to put some of this stuff together. So if you go to sync.io/guide, in the next few weeks, we will try to put learnings that we've made from what the likes of you two have done, but also what we've seen with other companies. Maybe just zooming out a little bit on the kind of communication aspect. I think you gave some good examples of how you detected issues, how you put the different checks in place, DBT, Sync, etc. And it would be really interesting just digging a little bit more into the communication aspect. So how do you kind of practically, how do you actually go about that, and where does it kind of stop and end?
I think maybe you should go first, Alejo, because I think it's a bigger topic for you.
Yes. So regarding communication, as I was explaining, we even have defined with our customer success team uh, um, how are we going to communicate, and then when there is an open incident, how frequently are we going to send status updates? Okay. One thing that was very differential when choosing Sync over other tools was the concept of triage. So, and it's key for my team. Triage, we keep doing triage, not only on incidents, but also on support tickets, because not every incident, not every issue is an incident, okay? So the triage part, the triage process, I think it's very smart, and it's for properly managing this. And then the ability to set up, to write down comments on the incident, to define the P1, P2, P3 criticality levels, and the impact. So this all this information is also key for properly communicating all. And for me, the triage, it's something that's very difficult to automate, because even when now, to be honest, we are still not automatically publishing our sync incidents to our customers. There is still a manual process in between. Okay, maybe in the medium long term, I want to be able to automatically manage this through the platform. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
That makes a lot of sense. I just see we have a question from live here. So based on what we talked about a little while ago with the unknown unknowns, I don't know if either of you want to jump on this.
Yeah, I can maybe share. So I think in most cases, we just don't know about them. And maybe in a month or two, a stakeholder brings it up and we find that we have an issue. So nothing happens with them until someone finds them by luck often.
Yeah, I'd say in my own experience, this is often the worst kind of issues, when you have an issue and you don't learn about it until maybe a month later. I think especially if when my previous job, we had data being used for machine learning models, and if we had data being incorrect, we might actually not immediately know about it because there's no human eyes that can spot in a chart that it's off, but it might impact something really important. So I kind of found that those unknown unknowns that goes uncaught for a long time is sometimes the worst kind of issues.
I want to add here that in our market, customers what ask us on top of anything, it's transparency. Okay, they're even requesting us to put quality metrics on their dashboards, because, and it's very related to what you, Michael, were saying. Okay, they keep making decisions based on our data, so they want to know if there is an incident one day. They want to know it because then that day they will not make this decision, or at least they will take it into consideration for their final decision. The worst that can happen, and this has happened to some of our competitors, is a customer knowing that there was an issue in the past and they made decisions with the data with that issue. Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, it's actually sometimes okay if you can detect the issue and display it to the customer that it's happening. But if they already made the decision, then it's a much worse severity.
They know about the complexities of our business, so they are not so worried about quality issues itself by themselves, but transparency, okay, and also for sure the ability for us to solve the issues in a fast way.
Yeah,
I think that's also quite true for us, that by being transparent and by catching issues before our stakeholders do, you really build trust in the data and the team.
Yeah. Maybe just following up on that, I can see Wojciech has a kind of related question here around SLAs and data products.
I can maybe start this one. We don't really have a formal agreement on this, but we have different priorities for our products, and we just know for our company which ones are important for our decision making. So depending on whether it's our most important metric, for example, ARR, we are very quick to communicate company-wide if there's issues, because we know decisions will be made on that quite regularly. But in our case, I think we want to go a bit deeper with that. We just defined all our data products. Like we want to go a bit deeper and set more formal SLAs. Yeah, but I think what we need to be careful there is that we do not overburden ourselves, because we are just an internal team, but we just need to make sure that that we do it where it matters. And I think that's, for us at least, what's really important about data products, that we can kind of differentiate between what matters and what doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, in our case, we have some SLAs in some of the agreements with some of our customers. We are tackling mostly completeness SLAs. So what I was saying, are we scrapping the retailers and the categories inside the retailers that we have agreed? And also the second one, it's about freshness. Okay, are we scrapping at the agreed frequency? So that those are already in place. But as we mature, we start to monitor, and they start to ask us SLAs about more complex things, about accuracy and reliability. Okay.
So in your case, Stein, you think about it internally in terms of how quickly you communicate, but actually, Alejo, in your case, you have to let customers know about these SLAs potentially.
Well, there are some SLAs about uptime. Okay, so we need to match these levels of completeness, I would say.
Yeah.
Is it set contractually then, or?
Yes.
Okay,
that's interesting.
And it's a trend in the sector. So by now it's only from big customers, but it's something that more and more they keep asking us to put in place in the contract.
Super interesting. If we think digging into a little bit more into that in a little bit as we talk about data products, but just before that, I had a question here I wanted to come back to. So you both mentioned you were deeply bought into DBT, and one of the reasons why you moved over to Sync was this ability to kind of manage everything from within DBT. Could you talk a bit about what that looks like in practice and some of the ways that you actually use DBT to manage your data reliability platform?
In our case, we, for example, use some of the newer DBT features like groups, and we use groups as data products. So it's quite easy to set that up then, because we can just link a group to a data product in Sync. And sorry, Mikael, like that's part of the question, but do you also want to know how it looks in practice, like when we get alerts, or?
Yeah, basically anything around the cohesiveness of the workflow with DBT and Sync.
So what we used to have actually is that we got our DBT alerts via Airflow to our Slack. And one of the big issues there was that if we have some alerts that are failing every hour, we get a Slack alert every hour from Airflow. And also that it's just multiple platforms that we're looking at for our triaging. And quite often these are related, like a test fails, so then some other volume monitor jumps or something. But now we see them kind of in one list when we're doing this triaging, and we can see what relates to each other. And what I really like is that we don't get those recurring alerts all the time. We can still get them once a day or something if we want to, but it's like if something is failing, it's not all the time in your face. We can kind of control it ourselves.
That's very, very useful. Okay, otherwise you get overwhelmed by the noise. Yes, in our case, we don't use DBT groups. Okay, maybe we use it in the future. We use DBT tags a lot, so we tag all our models, and this allows us in Sync to leverage those tags to, for instance, define data products. And one thing I really liked about DBT, about Sync, that I think helps us defining better DBT tests and even materialization types in DBT. I think it's something you introduced recently, is in the lineage. There is a filter where I can see upstream and downstream the DBT tests. So it's very useful because if I am defining a unique test in a model, and this model has some upstream and downstream models, okay, I want to know if I need to, first, if there is already a uniqueness test upstream or downstream, or if I also need to move this uniqueness test downwards, no? And the same for materialization type. So if I have an incremental model, it's very useful for me to see if downstream or upstream there is also incremental models or not.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's something we're also thinking hard about how we build that more into the product, and basically how we can help other people with testing best practices, which could be that maybe you don't need the same test if you don't transform the field at all.
Yeah.
Or you don't make any joins. Perhaps that first most upstream uniqueness test is all you need, and you don't need this whole range of duplicate tests. Just zooming out a little bit, so we talked a little bit about data products and SLAs, and I know Wojciech had a question about that, and you both pretty big believers in data product and that mindset. Could you talk a bit about what you even think a data product is, and also how you use it today?
That's a really hard question, Mikael. I think there's 10 different definitions out there for data products. But in our case, maybe to go a bit back, so when we started our data platform 4 years ago, and we grew like really rapidly in the years after. So we grew very quickly from 0 to 400 or 500 data models or even more. And we never really thought about data products or how to kind of split that up. So now, 4 years later, or let's say we started doing this properly a few months back, we really tried to, from what we currently have, we try to capture data products out of that to start to make sense more of the whole lineage that we have. Because we have a big lineage, we just need to figure out what's important so we can focus on that and we can optimize that. So in our case, we really started thinking about use cases and things that people find important. Sometimes thinking like, if this breaks, will somebody let us know very quickly or not? But for example, things we have as data products are important metrics for us, like ARR or gross margin. They require quite some work on our end. But also things like attribution or our sales forecasting, we've captured as products. And I think it's really just important use cases for us that people really rely on. And now we also have captured others, smaller ones that maybe are not so important, but just so that we can differentiate between that and that we make sure that we still have an overview of kind of everything, but we can really see where it matters.
I think you gave me the example, Stein, as well, that you used to have a kind of high-level data product called marketing, but then you realized only by breaking it down into different smaller data products could you kind of really distinguish and prioritize.
Yeah, for example, in marketing, I think split up even in 10 different products, where attribution is at the core of it. And on top of that, we built other things like our paid ad optimization and things like that. And also, like on top of that, what made it really useful for us is that we can split up ownership a lot better. Earlier, it was this big marketing product, and then who owns it really? And it was often still my team that took action on when there were issues, but we didn't really know about the intricacies of it. So now when we have those data products more granularly defined, people that actually know about what's happening behind those, they can take action on those alerts that we have.
Very interesting. So in our case, we are still in a previous stage. Also, the company, it's not so mature as big as yours. But we are starting both from a data point of view, but also from an organizational point of view, to think about products, and as data is our product, data products. So we are in parallel starting to organize in squads, and for all of these squads, we are identifying data products. So we have started with the most relevant and complex data products. We have both what they call consumer-oriented data products, so really data products that the end customer consumes directly, but also middleware or aggregated data products that are in between, that are needed for building the end customer-facing products, and are equally important. Okay, so we have some products like images, no? So out of everything that we scrap, we get the images of the products, and all these images need to go through a set of post-processing, like downloading the image, resizing or converting the image, extracting text from the image, comparing images with an algorithm. So this is a complex process, and we want to tackle images as a data product itself. Okay, and then we have end user consuming data products. So as I said, we are also organizing ourselves in squads so that we can properly assign owners to each of these data products.
That makes sense. I know there's a lot of theory around where you should draw the lines of data products. Some people believe that the producer data products should only rely on sources, and the consumer data products should only rely on other data products or aggregate marts. Have you gone to that level of thinking, or how you're approaching this?
All the time, Mikael, but it's really hard. We we had this big lineage, and then we cut it up into products, and we can see that in sync. And now we want to really make sure that the lineage for those is correct. So what happened for us in those past few years, we're building stuff, and somebody accidentally introduces some dependency on something that shouldn't have been there, making our whole lineage a lot more complex. And now we can actually see that one of our core data products is actually relying on something that actually is a lot more downstream. So we need to cut that and optimize that. So that's what we're now constantly doing, like cleaning up the depth. But by us being able to split it up into products, it's a lot clearer to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd imagine with a table level lineage that even just getting that insight might not be that easy.
Yeah, it's really hard because dbt's own documentation doesn't allow you to group things like that.
Yeah.
So Sync is able to do that, and that helps us a lot.
Yeah.
Super interesting. I'd say with data products and also with data mesh as an overall theme, it's probably one of the topics we hear the most often, but also one where people really struggle for even how to get started. So would you have for anyone who's kind of maybe a few steps before you in the process and haven't yet defined their first data product, what would be your advice to them, and how do you think they should start this?
I would say in our case, no, it's sorry, I was trying to open my notes. So in our case, we drew the value stream of the company. Okay. In our case, we have retailers on one side and brands on the other, no, and we fill the gap in between, no. So we define the value stream, all the processes, all the data assets that we have in the middle, and try to identify them. One of my suggestions is be pragmatic. Don't try to be perfect since the beginning. It's a continuous improvement process. So start with the ones that you have more clarity on. Start moving on. You don't need to be very verbose in terms of defining lots of processes, lots of documentation or definitions, and so on. Start with the things that pain more, so that are more valuable for the company? Like, is it about lack of documentation? Is it about lack of ownership, about lack of quality checks? In my case, it's also about cost and performance. So that's one of the things, no, I did when I joined Shalion is, okay, what are the critical aspects I need to tackle, no? I had to tackle cost and performance. I had to tackle quality. I had to tackle lack of documentation. And so for each of these pains, I try to bring a solution, no? Trying to not to reinvent the wheel and leverage the tools that we already have.
I totally agree with you there that you need to find where most of the pain is, where you get most of those questions, and start simple indeed. I've also found in my years that when I try to put too much process too quickly, it backfires and it actually doesn't get adopted. So try to really gradually do that and make sure that people see value in actually defining those processes. So I think in our case, one of our first products was actually our ARR, because it's a very important metric internally. And then from there, we started building on top of that.
Yeah, I'd also completely agree. I think that the places where I've seen it struggle to get adoption is when this big document and this big master plan where I think
avoid the big bang approach. I would say.
Yeah, 100%.
I think in general, like I found that that's really hard. You should never really works.
No.
I see we got a question here from Stephen. So to differentiate issues and incidents, to use priority on a data product, are there other considerations prior to explicitly declaring an incident?
Yeah, that's a tricky question.
I think you need to be careful, like to not call it too early, because that might also degrade trust if you have too many of them. But I think for us, it's always just take some time to triage it, and then I think it depends on the owner of the product. They can probably assess whether this is actually might be an issue, or whether they're like, this is like a regular thing and they don't need to. So nothing really quantitative on our end, at least.
To add on top of what you said, yes, for sure, the product owner of this product should help here. For sure, defining priorities beforehand is a good starting point, but every issue has its complexities, and you also need to do on a per issue basis.
Yeah, I know one thing that especially you, Stein, I know you've driven your team to really declare a lot of incidents, even if it's not a major outage. And I think we've often been asked this question, like, when should you declare an incident in the first place? But also, I think my own thoughts is there can be a lot of benefits in maybe declaring more rather than few incidents, but you get this kind of trace and this log you can look back on. So next time you have an issue, maybe you can find a similar incident. I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Were you at the same talk at Coalesce as I was, Mika?
Incident.io.
Yes. No. So yeah, actually, I agree with that. As long as you can kind of keep the overhead of declaring incidents low enough, so that you're not stuck in the admin of it. But I think in general, it's good to also declare small ones, as long as you also there can differentiate between the important ones and the not so important ones. Also, like, if you declare it, it goes away from the triage, so you just only see what's left over there to define. But yeah, I think we'd like to define declare plenty of them, but make sure that we still focus on the important ones. And indeed, we're not there yet. Like, we actually want to go more towards the incident approach that was discussed at Coalesce, where we have a more formal process there. But really, I think what's important with incidents is to have that feedback loop. Like, okay, this happened. What did we learn from it? What can we improve? And add more monitoring, more tests, or change your architecture or something. But I think that's the big benefit of taking a more incident-focused approach.
Yes, doing retros and postmortems is a very good initiative on this continuous improvement process that I was mentioning. And yes, also having a set of incidents helps you grow this knowledge base so that you are smarter on future incidents. This reminds me like when you handle a ticketing system like Zendesk, that it's both important the issues and how to handle issues part, but also the knowledge base part, because they retro fit each other. Okay, so the more knowledge base you have, the more you can automate issue resolution. The more issues you have, the more knowledge base you have.
Yeah, definitely. I think also with LLMs getting better and everything, I can imagine a world where if you already start collecting that data and those insights now, maybe as the tooling get better, you can actually think about some of this getting automated over time. I want to just return to, if you think about the first slides you presented around your data architecture, if you were to place yourself in the shoes of a data leader who is maybe 6 to 12 months earlier than you were, when you had a good dbt setup, but you knew that you wanted to catch some guardrails and you wanted to protect against unknown unknowns, what would be some considerations for that it's the right time to bring in a data reliability platform, and what kind of has to be true, do you think, in the business or the wider company?
I think it's kind of like, what's the impact of issues flowing through? I think it's a hard assessment to make like quantitatively, but I think it's like if you know some issues that have gone through, that maybe the ones we talked about earlier, that it take a month or two, like could we have caught this, and how much would that have been worth for us if we could have caught this?
Yeah.
And that's of course only the ones you find then, so probably there's more than just those.
Yes, I would add maybe it's important, and I think it's something that we already covered some minutes ago. It's to know the criticality of your different data assets, because I'm going back to the big bang approach. I wouldn't suggest just buying a data observability tool to plug and play and let the alerts dance. Okay. I would say you need first to have a little bit of clarity, like Stein was mentioning. We had a lot of clarity that ARR was one of our most critical metrics. So I think this is important to work beforehand.
Yeah, I like that expression, not letting the alerts dance. I think, Stein, we have a question here for you from John.
Yeah, I was just reading it. So actually, our marketing team, we have 2 analysts there. They are involved with the data as well. So I think more of the core models, my team develops them for them, but they are actually themselves already developing some of the data models. And we also have approached this in that way, that the ones where we kind of together develop them, we have an ownership together, and the ones that they really develop, they own them. But we're trying to find the right adoption there, not to have too many alerts going their way. So we're just gradually trying to have them adopt more of this ownership.
Here's a little bit more of a general question from Oliver, which I think you can get many different answers to this one, but we're very keen on your take.
Wow. I would say, well, first, so observability, it's more bringing what software teams have done since quite some years ago with software assets, which is not only doing static quality checks and unit tests, but also observing the assets in production, it's bringing this to the data and analytics domain, no? Data governance, it's a set of policies, processes, and people, no? But sometimes it's very static, I would say, okay? Observability, I would say it's more about how is this running and affecting production pipelines.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And I think maybe one observation I would add is I've often seen if you have people in different roles in companies with a data governance title, they're typically a little bit of a different profile than your typical data or analytics engineer, and sometimes not from the same technical background. So I've seen, especially in bigger companies, this data governance function actually has quite different needs and need to be able to, for instance, set guidelines across the entire company. And yeah, it varies a little bit depending on company. Just for the last few minutes here, so to round off, we'd love to hear from both of you. What's next for you? So now you've got in your modern data stack, you've defined your data products. What's the kind of next 2-3 things you're focusing on?
Wow, good question. So I think for us, it's really optimizing our architecture as a whole and making sure that we have like a good lineage, and by that ensuring a robuster system and making sure that we have more reliable data. But of course, you can always keep on doing this. But I think for us, it's a good time to do that. We'll also be, I think, like the approach we're now going to take is to focus more on fewer products and make them really well. We've noticed that there's actually a lot of benefit in doing that. So probably we'll actually be doing less as a team overall, but just doing it better. And I think that's really like, yeah, what we're now going to focus on. Other than that, perhaps we're still diving a bit deeper into metrics. We haven't really looked into that much, but I think there's a lot of potential for us there.
In our case, it's much related to what I was saying. So I would say two working lines. No, one it's what I was saying about communication. So better see and communicate the impact of the issues. So that also is related to lineage. Second one, it's trying to automate all this process and also automate the monitoring of our SLAs and publicly communicating this to our customers, maybe integrating this in the customer-facing dashboards. And the second working line, as I also mentioned, is to be able to detect more subtle issues, like the one I was mentioning, like you stop being able to scrap a specific subset of things in a retailer, and this is more complex to detect.
That makes sense. Super interesting. And last thing before we round off here, if people want to learn more or follow you or get in touch, what's the best place to do that?
LinkedIn for me. Just connect with me and happy to have a chat with anyone.
The same for me.
Perfect.
I think, Mikael, you can just tag us when you post on LinkedIn from Sync, and then people can easily find us.
I'll do that.
Sure.
I'll do that. And just a last shameless plug. So I'll just post in the chat here. We are writing up a guide where we're going to try to bring in a lot of these insights that Stein and Alejo and many others mentioned that will be released in November. So I just posted the link sync.io/guide in the comments here. So if you subscribe to that, we'll send that your way when it's ready. With that said, thank you so much, Stein and Alejo, for dialing in. This was super interesting.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.